The morning sky over Denver should have been clear blue, dotted with the occasional contrail from commercial aircraft. Instead, Lieutenant Jacob Chen stared up at a ceiling of gunmetal gray that pulsed with an otherworldly luminescence. The alien ships had been hanging there for 72 hours now, their massive forms blotting out the sun like mechanical storm clouds. Jacob adjusted his flight suit and checked his watch. 0800 hours. In 30 minutes, he'd be sitting in the briefing room with the other pilots, learning whether humanity's last-ditch plan had any chance of success. The coffee in his hand had gone cold, but he drank it anyway. Caffeine was caffeine, and he had a feeling he'd need every advantage he could get. The mess hall at Peterson Space Force Base buzzed with nervous energy. Conversations were hushed, punctuated by the occasional bark of laughter that sounded more desperate than amused. Everyone knew the stakes. The first wave of attacks had crippled major cities across the globe. London, Tokyo, New York, Moscow, all reduced to smoking craters within hours of the aliens' arrival. The only reason Earth hadn't been completely overrun was that the invaders seemed to be taking their time, methodically destroying infrastructure while herding survivors into designated zones. "Hey, Chen." Jacob turned to see Captain Sarah Mitchell approaching, her red hair pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow still managed to look disheveled. Dark circles under her green eyes spoke to the same sleepless nights they'd all been enduring. "Morning, Mitch. You look like hell." "Thanks, you charmer." "You ready for this?" Jacob shrugged. "As ready as anyone can be for a suicide mission." Sarah's expression darkened. "Don't call it that. We've got a real shot here." "Do we?" Jacob gestured toward the windows, where the alien ships hung motionless. "Look at those things. Each one's the size of a city. Our biggest nukes barely scratched their hulls." "That's why we're not going after the hulls," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Intel thinks they've found something. A weakness." Before Jacob could respond, the intercom crackled to life. "All personnel assigned to Operation Phoenix, report to Briefing Room Alpha immediately." Jacob drained the last of his cold coffee and followed Sarah toward the corridor. Whatever they were about to learn, he had a sinking feeling it would make the past 3 days look like a peaceful vacation. Briefing Room Alpha was packed with the best pilots Earth had left. Jacob recognized faces from bases around the world, pilots who'd been hastily evacuated when their home installations were vaporized. Major Williams from RAF Lakenheath, whose thick Yorkshire accent had become a source of comfort during the dark hours. Commander Rodriguez from Nellis, whose family had been in Las Vegas when the aliens struck. Captain Petrov from the Russian Air Force, whose stoic demeanor couldn't quite hide the grief in his eyes. General Morrison strode to the front of the room, his weathered face grim. Behind him, a massive holographic display flickered to life, showing a detailed schematic of the alien mothership that dominated the skies above Denver. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, "what I'm about to tell you does not leave this room. 72 hours ago, these bastards showed up and turned our world upside down. But they made one mistake: they underestimated human ingenuity." The hologram rotated, revealing the ship's internal structure. Jacob leaned forward, studying the complex network of corridors and chambers that honeycombed the vessel's interior. "Our scientists have been working around the clock, analyzing debris from the initial attacks and studying the electromagnetic signatures from these ships. They've identified what appears to be a central command nexus, a core control center that coordinates the entire fleet's operations." A pulsing red dot appeared deep within the ship's heart. "This is it. Command believes that if we can destroy this facility, we can cripple their coordination and buy Earth time to mount a proper defense." Captain Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sir, how exactly are we supposed to penetrate their defenses? Our fighters can barely scratch their escort ships." Morrison's smile was grim. "We're not going to fight our way in, Rodriguez. We're going to sneak in." The hologram shifted, showing a series of small, sleek craft unlike anything Jacob had ever seen. They were roughly the size of fighter jets, but their surfaces seemed to shimmer and bend light in impossible ways. "These are prototypes based on alien technology we've managed to reverse engineer. They're equipped with adaptive camouflage that should make them invisible to the alien sensors. Each one is essentially a flying bomb, packed with enough exotic matter to level a city block. Sarah spoke up. "Sir, how many of these prototypes do we have?" 12, Morrison replied. "One for each of you." The room fell silent. Jacob felt a chill run down his spine. 12 ships against an entire alien fleet. It sounded less like a military operation and more like a kamikaze run. "I won't lie to you," Morrison continued. "This is a one-way trip. These ships don't have the power cells for a return journey. But if even one of you reaches that command center, you could save billions of lives." Major Williams cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, sir, but what makes us so special? Why not send unmanned drones?" "Because, Major, the aliens have demonstrated an uncanny ability to detect and destroy our automated systems. Whatever technology they're using seems to ignore human consciousness. We need thinking, breathing, decision-making pilots in those cockpits." Jacob studied the schematic more carefully. The command center was buried deep within the ship, protected by layers of armor and defensive systems. Even with their stealth technology, the chances of reaching it seemed impossibly slim. "Sir," Jacob said, "what's the timeline?" "You launch in 6 hours. The aliens are bringing more ships into orbit every hour. If we wait any longer, their defenses will be too strong even for this plan." Morrison's gaze swept across the room, meeting each pilot's eyes in turn. "I'm not going to order any of you to do this. It's volunteer only. Anyone who wants out can leave now, no questions asked." Jacob looked around the room. Nobody moved. Sarah caught his eye and nodded slightly. Whatever happened, they were in this together. "All right then," Morrison said. "Let's go save the world." The next 4 hours passed in a blur of technical briefings, equipment checks, and what felt suspiciously like last meals. Jacob found himself in Hangar Bay 7, staring at the prototype fighter that would either carry him to victory or to his death. The craft was beautiful in an alien way. Its hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury, and touching it sent a strange tingling sensation up his arm. The cockpit was cramped but surprisingly intuitive. The alien technology had been integrated with human interfaces, creating a hybrid system that felt both familiar and utterly foreign. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" Jacob turned to find Dr. Elena Vasquez approaching, her lab coat stained with what looked like motor oil and exhaustion. She'd been part of the team that reverse-engineered the alien tech. "Will it actually work?" Jacob asked. Elena shrugged. "In theory, yes. The adaptive camouflage should render you invisible to their sensors, and the exotic matter payload has enough destructive potential to crack their command center wide open. In practice..." She gestured helplessly. "We've had 3 days to figure out technology that's probably centuries ahead of ours." "Reassuring," Jacob muttered. "The good news is that the alien systems seem to operate on similar principles to our own electronics, just at a much more advanced level. Think of it like the difference between a smartphone and a telegraph, same basic concepts, vastly different implementation." Jacob ran his hand along the ship's hull again. The surface rippled under his touch, almost like it was alive. "What exactly is this thing made of?" "We're not entirely sure. Some kind of programmable matter that responds to electromagnetic fields. The aliens seem to use it for everything: hulls, weapons, even their atmosphere processors." "Atmosphere processors?" Elena's expression darkened. "Yeah. They're not just conquering Earth, Jacob. They're terraforming it. The atmospheric changes we've detected over the impact sites suggest they're trying to make our planet more suitable for their physiology." The implications hit Jacob like a physical blow. This wasn't just an invasion, it was an extermination. The aliens weren't planning to coexist with humanity, they were planning to replace them entirely. "How long do we have?" he asked quietly. "At current rates? Maybe 6 months before the atmospheric changes become irreversible." Jacob nodded grimly. "No pressure at all." There's something else, Elena continued. The exotic matter payload, it's not just an explosive. When it detonates, it creates a cascade reaction that should propagate through any connected alien systems. If you can get it into their command center, it might do more than just destroy their coordination, it could cripple their entire technological infrastructure. Might? Science is rarely about certainties, Lieutenant. We're working with a lot of educated guesses in desperate hope. Jacob climbed into the cockpit and began running through the pre-flight checklist. The alien-human hybrid controls felt strange under his fingers, but muscle memory took over. He'd been flying for 12 years, and the fundamentals were the same regardless of the technology. Sarah appeared at the edge of the cockpit. How are you feeling? Like I'm about to pilot a UFO into the heart of an alien mothership to save humanity, Jacob replied. You know, typical Tuesday. Sarah laughed, and for a moment the weight of their situation lifted slightly. Remember when our biggest worry was passing our annual flight physicals? Simpler times, Jacob agreed. He looked around the hangar, where 11 other pilots were making similar preparations. Think any of us will make it? Someone has to, Sarah said firmly. The odds are against any individual making it through, but 12 ships? One of us will get lucky. Jacob hoped she was right. The alternative was too terrible to contemplate. An hour later, General Morrison's voice echoed through the hangar. All pilots, final briefing in 10 minutes. Jacob sealed his helmet and ran through the startup sequence one more time. The ship's systems hummed to life around him, alien technology interfacing seamlessly with his human biology. Warning lights flickered and died as the stealth systems activated, and suddenly the other ships in the hangar became barely visible shimmers in the air. This was it. In 30 minutes, they'd be launching into the unknown, carrying humanity's last hope in their bomb bays. Jacob closed his eyes and thought of his sister's family in Portland, of his parents in California, of the billions of people counting on them whether they knew it or not. When he opened his eyes again, his hands were steady on the controls. Time to go to work. The alien mothership hung directly overhead as Jacob's fighter screamed toward the ionosphere, its adaptive hull rendering it invisible to conventional sensors. The stealth technology was working perfectly, too perfectly. Jacob felt isolated, cut off from his squad mates even though he knew they were flying in loose formation around him. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The 12 fighters would approach from different vectors, using the Earth's magnetic field to mask their approach signatures. Each pilot would attempt to penetrate the mothership's hull at a different point, increasing the odds that at least one would reach the command center. Jacob's target was a maintenance bay on the ship's ventral surface. Intelligence suggested it would be lightly defended and provide access to the internal transport network. Of course, intelligence had been wrong about a lot of things lately. Phoenix leader to all Phoenix birds, came Morrison's voice through the encrypted comm channel. You are go for final approach. Godspeed. Jacob's fighter shuddered as it hit the outer edge of the alien ship's defensive perimeter. Energy fields that could vaporize a conventional aircraft passed harmlessly around his hull, the alien stealth technology performing exactly as advertised. For the first time since the invasion began, Jacob allowed himself to feel a spark of hope. The mothership's hull filled his viewport, a vast expanse of the same programmable matter that composed his fighter. Up close, he could see the surface shifting and flowing like a living thing, constantly adapting and reconfiguring itself. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Phoenix 7, I'm taking heavy fire. Commander Rodriguez's voice crackled through the comm stealth as compromised, they see me. Jacob's heart sank. If the aliens had found a way to detect their approach, the entire mission was doomed. But his sensors showed no sign of pursuit, no energy weapons tracking his position. Phoenix 7, evasive maneuvers, Morrison's voice commanded. All other Phoenix birds, maintain approach vectors. Jacob forced himself to focus on his own mission. Rodriguez's fate was out of his hands now. The maintenance bay was directly ahead, its massive doors sealed against the vacuum of space. According to the briefing, he needed to find an access port somewhere along the bay's perimeter. There, a small hatch marked with alien symbols that the analysis team had identified as an airlock. Jacob maneuvered his fighter toward it, grateful for the craft's incredible maneuverability. The alien technology seemed to respond to his thoughts as much as his physical controls. Phoenix 3, Phoenix 5, and Phoenix 11, we've lost contact, Morrison reported. All remaining birds, you are weapons free. Complete your missions by any means necessary. Jacob's jaw tightened. They were losing people fast. Time was running out. The airlock was designed for alien maintenance craft, but Jacob's fighter was small enough to squeeze through if he was careful. The outer door opened at his approach. Apparently the aliens weren't expecting an attack from inside their own stealth technology. Jacob found himself in a cavernous maintenance bay filled with alien equipment he couldn't begin to identify. Massive mechanical arms hung from the ceiling like sleeping predators, and the walls were lined with storage compartments that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Phoenix 2 is down, Sarah's voice came through the comm, tight with pain. Hull breach in Sector 7. I'm going to try to ram the power core. Sarah, no! Jacob shouted, but the comm channel went dead. Jacob forced himself to focus. Grief was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. According to the schematics, he needed to find a transport tube that would carry him deeper into the ship. The command center was still miles away, buried in the heart of the massive vessel. He spotted what looked like a tunnel entrance on the far side of the maintenance bay. The opening was circular and lined with the same flowing metal as the ship's hull. Jacob carefully maneuvered his fighter toward it, hoping the tunnel would be large enough to accommodate his craft. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, its walls occasionally pulsing with patterns of light that might have been alien writing or some kind of data stream. Jacob pushed his fighter to maximum speed, knowing that every second increased the chances of detection. Phoenix leader to remaining birds, Morrison's voice was barely audible through the static. Alien forces are converging on Earth. Whatever you're going to do it fast. Jacob's blood ran cold. If the aliens were moving to finish their conquest, millions more people would die while he was still trying to reach his target. He pushed his fighter even harder, the alien engines responding with a surge of power that would have been impossible with human technology. The tunnel began to branch, splitting into dozens of different passages. Jacob consulted his navigation system, trying to match the tunnel layout with the schematic data. Left at the first junction, straight through the next three, then right toward what should be the central core. Suddenly, his stealth systems screamed a warning. Something was coming up behind him, something big and moving fast. Jacob's fighter shuddered as energy blasts filled the tunnel behind him. Whatever was pursuing him had found a way to track his position despite the stealth technology. He yanked his craft into a sharp left turn, diving down a maintenance shaft that was barely wide enough to accommodate his fighter. The tunnel walls flashed past in a blur of alien metal and pulsing lights. Jacob's pursuer, some kind of automated defense drone, stayed on his tail, its energy weapons carving chunks out of the tunnel walls. Sparks and debris filled the air around him as the ship's automated systems tried to repair the damage. "Come on," Jacob muttered, pushing his fighter to its limits. The alien technology responded beautifully, the craft seeming to anticipate his movements and adjust its flight path accordingly. But his pursuer was gaining ground. Jacob spotted another junction ahead and made a split-second decision. Instead of following his planned route, he dove into a tunnel marked with alien symbols that probably meant authorized personnel only. The passage was smaller, forcing him to reduce speed, but it might throw off his pursuer. The gambit worked. The defense drone shot past the junction, apparently unable to make the sharp turn at its current velocity. Jacob allowed himself a moment of relief before consulting his navigation system again. The detour had cost him precious time and taken him away from his planned route. According to his instruments, he was now in some kind of residential or crew quarters section of the ship. The tunnels here were smaller and more numerous, forming a maze-like network that would be easy to get lost in. Jacob chose a passage that seemed to head in the general direction of the ship's center and hoped for the best. The walls here were different, more organic looking, with surfaces that seemed to breathe and pulse with their own internal rhythm. Occasionally he passed openings that led to larger chambers, and he caught glimpses of alien architecture that defied human understanding. "Phoenix 4 to any Phoenix bird," came a voice through the static. Major Williams, his Yorkshire accent thick with stress. "I've reached Sector 12, but I'm pinned down by defense systems. Request immediate assistance." Jacob wanted to help, but he was lost in the alien maze and running out of time. Every minute he spent trying to find Williams was another minute the aliens had to strengthen their defenses or complete their conquest of Earth. "Phoenix 6, I've got eyes on the command center," came another voice, Captain Petrov. Beginning final approach. Jacob felt a surge of hope. If Petrov could complete the mission, Jacob's own struggles would be worthwhile. He pushed his fighter through another junction, following a tunnel that seemed to be heading toward the ship's core. "Phoenix 6 is down," Petrov's voice came through the comm a moment later, calm despite the circumstances. "Hull breach, systems failing. Cannot complete mission." The hope died in Jacob's chest. How many of them were left? How many more would die before this was over? His navigation system chimed, indicating that he was approaching the ship's central core. Jacob felt his pulse quicken as the tunnel ahead opened into a vast chamber filled with alien technology beyond human comprehension. The command center. The chamber was enormous, easily the size of a football stadium, and filled with towering structures that pulsed with energy and data streams. At the center stood what could only be the main control nexus, a crystalline structure the size of a building, surrounded by floating platforms where alien technicians worked at incomprehensible controls. Jacob's fighter emerged from the tunnel into the chamber's vast space, still cloaked by stealth technology. For a moment, he simply stared at the alien technology surrounding him. This was the heart of their invasion force, the brain that coordinated the destruction of Earth's cities and the slaughter of its people. Time to cut off the head. Jacob armed his exotic matter payload and began his attack run. The crystalline command nexus grew larger in his viewport as he dove toward it, his fighter's systems calculating the optimal detonation point for maximum damage. Alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. Jacob's stealth had finally failed, either overwhelmed by the command center's more sophisticated sensors or simply exhausted after hours of operation. Energy weapons tracked his position as alien defenders scrambled to intercept him. Jacob jinked left and right, using every trick he'd learned in 12 years of flying to avoid the incoming fire. His fighter's alien technology helped, the craft responding to his intentions with inhuman precision. But there were too many weapons, too many defenders. A blast caught his port wing, sending his fighter into a spin. Jacob fought for control as warning lights flooded his cockpit. The exotic matter payload was still armed, still functional, but his fighter was dying around him. The command nexus filled his viewport. Jacob could see alien technicians evacuating their positions, abandoning their posts as they realized what was about to happen. In seconds, he would be close enough to guarantee that the exotic matter blast would destroy the entire facility. Another energy bolt pierced his cockpit, and Jacob felt searing pain across his left side. His vision blurred as blood filled his helmet, but he kept his finger on the trigger. Just a few more seconds. The command nexus loomed directly ahead. Jacob whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening and triggered the exotic matter payload. The universe turned white. Jacob's fighter disintegrated around him as the exotic matter payload detonated, releasing energies that human science barely understood. But the stealth technology had given him one final gift: he was close enough to the command nexus that the blast caught it in its full fury. The crystalline structure cracked like a broken mirror, fractures spreading through its surface in a pattern that was almost beautiful. For a moment, time seemed suspended as the alien control systems tried to process what was happening to their central brain. Then the cascade began. The exotic matter blast propagated through the ship's network of programmable matter, spreading like a virus through every system and subsystem. Lights flickered and died as control circuits overloaded. The artificial gravity failed, sending debris floating through the command chamber in lazy spirals. Jacob felt himself falling through vacuum, his damaged flight suit struggling to maintain pressure. His vision was fading, but he could see the chaos spreading through the command center as alien technicians fled in panic. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls as the ship's automated systems tried desperately to contain the damage. Through his helmet comm, Jacob could hear voices, human voices, speaking in dozens of languages as Earth's defenders realized what was happening. The mothership is breaking apart. Energy levels are dropping across all alien vessels. They're retreating. The aliens are actually retreating. Jacob smiled despite the pain. He'd done it. Somehow, against all odds, he'd actually done it. The command chamber was dissolving around him as the ship's programmable matter lost coherence. What had once been solid walls now flowed like liquid, revealing the internal structure of the massive vessel. Jacob could see other sections of the ship through the gaps, some still functioning, others dark and dead as the cascade effect spread. Emergency pods launched from the ship's hull as the alien crew abandoned their dying vessel. Jacob watched them flee with satisfaction. For 3 days, they had seemed invincible, their technology so far beyond human understanding that resistance seemed futile. But they weren't gods, they were just people with better toys, and people could be beaten. Jacob's flight suit finally gave up the fight against vacuum, and he felt the last of his air escaping into space. His vision darkened as consciousness faded, but he kept his eyes fixed on the alien ship as it broke apart around him. Pieces of the massive vessel tumbled past him in slow motion, some still glowing with residual energy, others dark and lifeless. The sight was strangely peaceful, like watching a mechanical sunset as humanity's greatest threat dissolved into space debris. Jacob's last thought before darkness took him was of Sarah, of Rodriguez, of Petrov and Williams and all the others who hadn't made it this far. They'd done their part too, drawing fire and attention that had allowed him to reach his target. None of them would be going home, but Earth would survive because of their sacrifice. The mothership's death throes illuminated the void around him like fireworks, and Jacob Chen closed his eyes with a smile on his face. Jacob woke up in a hospital bed with no memory of how he'd gotten there. The last thing he remembered was floating in space, watching the alien mothership tear itself apart as the exotic matter cascade spread through its systems. He should have died in the vacuum, would have died, if not for the emergency beacon in his flight suit and the rescue crews that had launched the moment Earth's sensors detected the alien retreat. The doctor who examined him was Dr. Vasquez, the same woman who'd helped prepare his fighter for the mission. She looked considerably more rested than the last time he'd seen her, though dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd been working around the clock. "How long was I out?" Jacob asked, his voice rough from the breathing tube they'd only recently removed. 2 weeks, Elena replied, checking his chart. "You had severe decompression injuries, radiation exposure, and blood loss from the shrapnel wounds. For a while there, we weren't sure you'd make it." Jacob tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through his chest. "The aliens, are they gone?" Elena's smile was the first genuinely happy expression Jacob had seen since the invasion began. "They're gone. Your mission worked better than we'd dared hope." The cascade effect didn't just destroy the mothership's command center, it propagated to every alien vessel in the fleet. Within hours, they were all retreating beyond the outer solar system. Jacob felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. "The other pilots, did anyone else make it?" Elena's expression sobered. "You were the only one, Jacob." Phoenix 4, Major Williams, they found his fighter crashed in the mothership's wreckage. He'd made it to within a few hundred meters of a secondary command center before his ship gave out. "The others?" She shook her head. Jacob closed his eyes, feeling the familiar grief settle over him like a blanket. 11 good people had died so that he could complete the mission. Sarah, Rodriguez, Petrov, Williams, all of them gone. "They're calling you a hero," Elena continued quietly. "The president wants to give you the Medal of Honor. They're saying you saved the human race." "I didn't do it alone," Jacob said firmly. "None of us did. If Sarah hadn't drawn fire during her approach, if Williams hadn't disabled those defense systems, if the others hadn't kept the aliens busy." He trailed off, the magnitude of their collective sacrifice overwhelming him. Elena nodded. The memorial is next week. All 12 of you are being honored. Jacob stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a routine Air Force pilot flying training missions and complaining about paperwork. Now he was apparently the savior of humanity, the sole survivor of a mission that had seemed impossible from the start. What happens now? He asked. Now we rebuild. The aliens did a lot of damage, but they didn't finish the job. The atmospheric processors they deployed have been shut down, and the terraforming effects are already reversing. It'll take time, years, maybe decades, but Earth will recover. Jacob thought about that. Cities rebuilt, families reunited, children born who would grow up in a world where alien invasion was just a scary story from history books. It was a future worth dying for, worth killing for, if necessary. There's something else, Elena said, her voice taking on a different tone. We've learned a lot from the alien technology we captured. Medical applications, clean energy, space travel capabilities that make our current rockets look like bicycles. Humanity is going to change, Jacob. The invasion was a catastrophe, but it's also going to catapult us into a new age. Jacob nodded slowly. Maybe that was the real victory, not just surviving the alien attack, but using their own technology to become something more than they'd been before. The species that had nearly destroyed them might end up being the catalyst for humanity's transformation into something greater. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. General Morrison entered, looking considerably more relaxed than during their last meeting. Behind him came a parade of officials, politicians, military brass, and people Jacob didn't recognize but who radiated importance. Lieutenant Chen, Morrison said with a smile, feeling up to some visitors. The President of the United States would like a word. Jacob looked down at his hospital gown and the various tubes still attached to his body. I'm not exactly dressed for a presidential visit, sir. Don't worry about that, came a familiar voice from the hallway. The President stepped into the room, flanked by Secret Service agents but wearing a surprisingly casual expression. I think we can overlook protocol under the circumstances. The next hour was a blur of handshakes, photos, and formal speeches that would be repeated on news broadcasts around the world. Jacob found himself awarded the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and several other decorations whose names he immediately forgot. The President spoke about heroism and sacrifice, about the price of freedom and the courage of those willing to pay it. Through it all, Jacob thought about his fallen squad mates. This ceremony should have been for all of them, not just the one who'd been lucky enough to survive. But he accepted the honors on their behalf, knowing that their families would see these images and understand that their loved ones had not died in vain. 6 months after the invasion, Jacob stood on the observation deck of Orbital Station Alpha, humanity's first permanent space habitat built with recovered alien technology. Through the massive windows, he could see Earth spinning slowly below, its blue surface unmarred by the scars of war. The craters left by alien weapons had been filled in, the damaged cities rebuilt with architecture that incorporated both human aesthetics and alien functionality. It was beautiful and strange and hopeful all at once. Penny for your thoughts? Sarah's voice came from behind him. Jacob turned, startled. Sarah Mitchell stood in the doorway, very much alive and sporting a mechanical arm that gleamed with alien alloys. Her rescue from the wreckage of her fighter had been one of several miracles in the weeks following the invasion. I thought you were dead, Jacob said, still not quite believing his eyes. Sarah grinned. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. Turns out alien stasis fields are better at keeping someone alive than our own medical technology. Though I did lose the arm. She flexed her mechanical fingers, and Jacob could see the alien technology seamlessly integrated with human engineering. How long have you been awake? 2 months. They wanted to make sure the cybernetic integration was stable before they let me start flying again. She moved to stand beside him at the window. Beautiful, isn't it? Hard to believe it almost ended. Jacob nodded. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd failed. Would the aliens have completed their terraforming? Would they have wiped us out entirely? Does it matter? Sarah asked. We didn't fail. Humanity survived, and now we're stronger than ever. She was right. The integration of alien technology had revolutionized human civilization almost overnight. Clean energy had eliminated pollution. Medical advances had virtually eliminated disease. Space travel that would have taken decades to develop had been achieved in months. The new fighters are incredible, Sarah continued. Want to see one? Jacob followed her through the station's corridors, marveling at the seamless blend of human and alien architecture. The walls seemed to pulse with organic life, but the overall design was unmistakably human in its proportions and layout. It was as if two civilizations had met and found a way to create something beautiful together. The hangar bay housed a dozen of the new hybrid fighters, their hulls shifting and flowing with programmable matter while their cockpits retained familiar human controls. They were beautiful machines, elegant and deadly in equal measure. They're calling it the Phoenix Mark II, Sarah said, running her hand along one fighter's hull. Twice the speed of the old prototypes, armed with weapons that make our old missiles look like firecrackers, and equipped with defensive systems that can stop anything the aliens threw at us. Jacob studied the craft with professional interest. Think we'll need them? The aliens? Probably not anytime soon. Our intelligence suggests they've retreated to their home system, licking their wounds and probably arguing about whether to try again. But there are other species out there, Jacob. The galaxy is a big place, and not everyone in it is going to be friendly. Jacob considered that. The idea that humanity was no longer alone in the universe was still sinking in. Earth had gone from being an isolated world to being part of a vast galactic community, whether it wanted to be or not. Besides, Sarah continued, these aren't just weapons. They're exploration vehicles. Humanity is about to take its first real steps into the galaxy. Someone's going to need to scout ahead, make contact with other species, establish trade routes and diplomatic relations. Sounds like a job for a pilot, Jacob said with a smile. It does, doesn't it? Sarah grinned back. Command has authorized the formation of an interstellar reconnaissance squadron. They're calling it Phoenix Squadron, in honor of the pilots who saved Earth. Interested in joining up? Jacob looked out through the hangar's force field at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there were worlds and civilizations beyond human imagination. There were probably threats too, species as hostile as the ones who'd invaded Earth, or worse. But there were also opportunities, chances for humanity to grow and learn and become something greater than it had ever been. When do we ship out? He asked. Next month. First mission is a diplomatic contact with a species called the Centauri. Apparently they've been trying to reach us for decades, but the aliens were jamming their communications. Jacob nodded. A new mission, a new adventure, a chance to explore the galaxy in ships that were partly human and partly alien. It seemed fitting somehow, humanity moving forward not by rejecting their former enemy's technology, but by embracing it and making it their own. Count me in, he said. As they walked back through the station, Jacob thought about the path that had brought him here. 3 months ago, he'd been preparing for what he thought was a suicide mission. Now he was preparing for humanity's first steps into a larger universe. The aliens who'd tried to destroy Earth had instead given them the tools to join the galactic community as equals. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected, but it was the one they'd earned through courage and sacrifice and sheer bloody-minded determination to survive. Jacob looked forward to seeing what came next. Through the station's windows, Earth turned slowly in space, blue and green and beautiful and alive. Humanity's home world, and now the launching point for adventures among the stars. The future was going to be amazing. 20 years after the invasion, Jacobson stood before a class of young pilots at the academy, their eager faces reflecting the same hunger for adventure he'd once felt. Some were human, others were Centauri or Kalani or members of the dozen other species humanity had encountered in its expansion across the galaxy. All wore the same uniform, all carried the same determination to protect the peaceful worlds from those who would do them harm. The Phoenix Squadron was born from humanity's darkest hour, Jacob told them, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd lived through history. 12 pilots volunteered for what everyone believed was a suicide mission. 11 of them died so that Earth could live. He gestured to the memorial wall behind him, where holographic portraits showed the faces of Sarah Mitchell, Antonio Rodriguez, Dmitry Petrov, James Williams, and the others who'd given their lives in the invasion's final hours. Sarah had lived to see the squadron's first missions, but a space battle with hostile raiders 5 years ago had finally claimed her. The mechanical arm she'd worn had been recovered from the wreckage and now rested in a place of honor beside her portrait. They didn't die so that humanity could become conquerors, Jacob continued. They died so that we could become protectors. The Phoenix Squadron's mission is to ensure that no species ever faces the kind of threat Earth faced that day. We are the shields that guard the innocent, the swords that strike down those who would prey upon the helpless. A young human cadet raised her hand. Sir, is it true that you were the only survivor? Jacob nodded. I was lucky. My squad-mate's sacrifices created the opening I needed to complete the mission. But survival isn't about luck, it's about preparation, determination, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to protect those who can't protect themselves. Another cadet, this one a Centauri with the characteristic blue-tinted skin and silver eyes of his species, spoke up. Commander, what was it like? Flying into the alien ship, knowing you probably wouldn't come back? Jacob paused, remembering the weight of the exotic matter payload in his fighter's belly, the taste of fear in his mouth as energy weapons tracked his position, the moment of absolute commitment when he triggered the detonation sequence. Terrifying, he said honestly. But fear isn't the enemy, cowardice is. Fear keeps you alive by making you careful. Cowardice gets people killed by making you hesitate when action is required. Every one of you will face moments when you're afraid. What matters is what you do with that fear. The class continued for another hour, covering tactical doctrine, alien psychology, and the complex web of alliances and treaties that now govern galactic civilization. When it was over, Jacob dismissed the cadets and walked to his office overlooking the Academy's flight training fields. The new Phoenix squadrons, there were dozens of them now, stationed throughout human space and beyond, flew modified versions of the hybrid fighters that had grown out of the original alien technology. They were faster, more powerful, and more sophisticated than anything Jacob had imagined during those desperate hours 20 years ago. But they still carried the same mission, to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them, no matter the cost. Jacob's desk held reports from across the galaxy, updates on trade negotiations with the colony, intelligence about a potential threat from beyond the galactic rim, requests for assistance from newly contacted species who were dealing with their own hostile neighbors. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but it was also full of dangers that required constant vigilance. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Jacob's aide appeared on his holographic display, a competent young woman named Lieutenant Torres who reminded him a bit of Sarah in her determination and skill. Sir, we've received a priority transmission from deep space. Long-range scouts have detected something unusual near the galactic core, massive energy signatures that don't match any known technology. Jacob felt a familiar tightness in his chest. After 20 years of relative peace, humanity had grown comfortable with its role as galactic protectors. But the universe was vast, and there were always new threats emerging from the darkness between stars. Assemble the senior staff, he said. And prep Phoenix Squadron Alpha for possible deployment. As Torres acknowledged the order and closed the channel, Jacob turned back to the memorial wall. The faces of his fallen comrades looked down at him with the same determination they'd shown that day 20 years ago when they'd volunteered for an impossible mission. Looks like we might have work to do, he said quietly. The universe was vast and dangerous, but humanity was no longer alone. They had allies now, friends among the stars who would stand with them against whatever threats emerged from the void. And they had the Phoenix squadrons, carrying on the legacy of 12 pilots who'd been willing to die to save their world. Jacob Chen, hero of Earth and protector of the galaxy, walked to the window and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, new adventures waited. New challenges, new dangers, New opportunities to prove that courage and sacrifice could overcome any odds. The phoenix had risen from the ashes of humanity's darkest hour. Now it soared among the stars, guardian of peace in a universe that desperately needed protecting. And Jacob couldn't wait to see what came next.